I gathered several bones for this project, a skull, a couple of leg bones, a vertebra, and an old jawbone. And I took all of them and washed them with soap and some scrubbers. Some of them I had to scrub a little bit more than others because they were still loaded with dirt, and some of them still had gristle and tissue on them. So the ones that were really bad with gristle and tissue, I ended up boiling. The skull wasn't too bad, so I just let it soak longer and I scrubbed it again later. Now when I started boiling the bones and they actually hit a hard rolling boil, I found that the gristle and the tissue started to soften after about 2 minutes. But it really wasn't enough to get anything off. I really needed to let it soak for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, and then I was able to scrape off some of the gristle. Now you only want to boil it as long as you have to, because that heat will set some of the fat into the bone and kind of stain it a little bit yellow, and it'll get more yellow the longer you boil it. So once it's soft enough to start scraping it off, go ahead, pull it out. I used a butter knife. Well, you still have to be careful so that you don't damage the bone when you're using a butter knife, but I definitely needed something stronger than a little dish pad or one of those vegetable type scrubbers. It needed to be stronger than that in order to get this gristle off. And another thing to keep in mind is make sure you scrape it off while it is hot. At one point I pulled a bone out and I went to scrape it off and I had to step away for a minute. When I came back, everything was cold and it wouldn't scrape off, so I had to boil it again, which again sets those stains and makes it even more yellow. So ideally you want to just boil it until it's pretty much soft enough to scrape it off with a gentler scraper. Now after I finished scrubbing the skull for the second time, I went ahead and took all the bones that I had and I put them in a bin full of hot soapy water. And the idea is to pull the extra fats out and oils out of the bones. And preferably you'd like to put them in this hot soapy water bath in a bin that doesn't have a big crack in it that's going to leak all over your tile like mine did. I started moving the water over with a pitcher because the bin was just too heavy for me to lift. I was really grateful when somebody with muscles showed up to rescue me. Thanks, love. I let the bones sit in this hot soapy water bath overnight, again to pull out those oils and fats, just the last little bits, and then I once again kind of scrubbed over all of it to make sure that I got all the debris off. I felt a little bit like an elk dentist with how much I had to clean out of those teeth. It was a mess. Then I rinsed off the soap and water and got it ready for whitening. I used hair developer, which is basically hydrogen peroxide, but hydrogen peroxide from the store is 2 volume, and this is a 20 volume, which is so much stronger. And I mixed it with baking soda until it was about a toothpaste consistency. Then I spread it over the bones fairly thick and covered it with cardboard because light affects the hydrogen peroxide and makes it ineffective. So I only did that with 2 bones. With a 3rd bone, I put some of this hair developer in the bottom of a number 10 can, and then I filled that with water and mixed it together and then put the bone in. This one wasn't as effective, and I think it's because I added too much water. If I used more hair developer, I think it would be more effective. Considering that I was able to dunk the whole bone in there, I think it would be more effective if it were a stronger solution, because it can reach in places that my little toothbrush could not reach. But I also think that this is a little more expensive because you'd have to use more hair developer. Now about 6 hours later, when I pulled that box off, I noticed that the mixture had gotten all foamy and poofy. Kind of looked marshmallowy actually, it was kind of interesting. But I washed all of that nonsense off and then let everything dry overnight so that it would be ready for burning in the morning. Now an interesting observation, the ones that I had just scrubbed with soap and water originally instead of boiling, they had pink spots on them. Eventually they dried out, but it was very different. The other bones that I boiled were still more yellow. Now I should also mention that the other side needs to be whitened. This bone that I'm holding here, it was very clear once it dried that one side had been whitened and the other had not, so make sure you whiten both sides. And not to leave you with a cliffhanger or anything, but the next video I'm going to show you how I would burn these babies.